Temple says, what if the Alliance won? What would WWE be like today? Would it be the same? I think it would have been very daring had the Alliance had won this. It would have been a creative shift, and like everyone kind of expected going in, well, it's WWE, so WWE's going to win this. So had they really pulled a twist and changed things and have an Alliance win, what if we'd got Nitro replacing Raw for a few weeks? SmackDown being replaced by Thunder, and at the start of 2002 the NWO were brought in anyway, so they could start bringing these guys in, like, you know, you get your Rey Mysterios, your Big Papa Pumps. It could have been really interesting just to see then how Vince could have found a way to try and find his way back in, and how WWE would try and grapple and wrestle it back. Would it been a case that then eventually would have had Raw for WWE on a Monday and Nitro on a Friday for SmackDown, instead of having the draft that we inevitably had play out because the rosters were too big, and they learnt that sort of 4 to 6 months later? It could have been a really fun twist, and I do think that this rivalry between WWE, WCW and ECW as a branding could have gone on for years had it been booked correctly. Had they bought people out of their contracts like Goldberg, Hogan, Nash, Hall, Sting, Rey Mysterio, you know. Hey, Eddie Guerrero wasn't around at this point. He came after WrestleMania 18, I think the night after, the would feud with RVD. So there's plenty of names that were missing around this time period, and I think just would have made this a bit better.
There's another thing about it is you could have done a re-invasion. So for instance, if the Alliance had won, you could have had broadcast Vince and like Vince trying to get back on top, and ultimately would have ended in like Invasion 2 essentially. Like, you know how we have World War 1, World War 2, you'd have had Invasion and Invasion 2, and you could have just flipped it and gone back to it, and it would have been like almost, you could have done it as a culmination of like a 3 or 4 year story. Like you said, when you bring in NWO, you bring in Goldberg, you bring in possibly Sting if they'd have ever have done it, and yeah, you could have ultimately just flipped it back to being WWE like 3 years later.
And they could have really been creative with the shows as well. Like, imagine the next show after this was Vengeance. Of course, that's the night that Chris Jericho beat Rock and Austin the same night to become champion. But what if it had been called Starrcade? Because that's the December show for WCW. It was literally there a month later. They could have done Starrcade. They could have then, you mentioned there World War, like they could have brought in World War 3, had the 3 rings. They could have experimented with that sort of stuff. They could have experimented with war games like 20 odd years ago had they wanted to.